Hey, Angela, are you a moderator for this session?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to make you, do you want me to make you the host or the co-host?
Whatever works for you.
Okay, I'm going to make you the host, but when you're done, make
Yes.
sure that you make me the host again.
Okay.
Like before you leave.
Okay.
Okay, make host. Right, there you go. And then you can let whoever the presenter is, if they want to be host, you can turn that over to them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure, and I'm gonna stay. I'm just going to cover up my camera. So.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Lisa.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so welcome everybody to Executive Function Hacks for Distance Learning with Sara Kesty. So happy for you to be here, Sara.
Thank you. Am I ready to roll?
You are ready to rock.
Okay. I'm going to try to model what I practice, what I preach. Oh my goodness. I was just reading a little bit more about Turner syndrome, Elvira. So we'll have to connect. That would be super exciting. I've also had a student with Turner syndrome who made it through high school, and I met her when she was a third grader. So it is possible and very an opportunity to be creative. Can I frame it like that? We'll talk more. Okay, please, as a norm, interrupt me if you have a question. I mean, obviously, respectfully, but I do not want to plow through this. This is really heady. I don't want to plow through this and leave any holes in your understanding because it develops on top of itself. So if you have a question and you type it in the chat and I miss it, Angela has permission to poke me. And if you need to just unmute and say, hey, can you clarify or give an example, something like that. I live and breathe this stuff, and I tried to make it as clear as possible, but we're all coming from different levels of understanding. So please feel free, like this is a conversation, not a only me on the mic. Okay, we're sharing it. All right. Yay. Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm like my friends are here. Like this is the most social I've been in so long. Scott and Karen and Angela. Woo! I love it. Okay. So here is the deal. Why are my slides not moving? I have a podcast where you get to hear this geek for 20 minutes a week if you would like to. I really try to fill it with practical stuff. Not a lot of banter, just get down to it, give examples, and empower families and students. So I'd love to get your feedback, and if you are interested in listening to the podcast, it is something I'm super proud of. I think I'm getting emails from all over the country that are parents and teachers saying like, wow, this really changed my perspective, which was exactly the goal. I want to, if nothing else, when you walk away from this, I want you to walk away with the perspective of being an executive function detective and being less annoyed with the kids that maybe are lacking these skills, because it really can look like a bad behavior if we don't have the right lenses on. All right, so quickly, just as a warm-up, as a welcome back from lunch mental movie, picture physical school, and there's something that prompts the kids to come to your next period. So after recess or maybe second or third period, what are the students doing at that time? What environmental clues happened to get them to that space? So think for a bit. You can unmute or even pop it in the chat. That's super nice. Katie Mack. Thank you.
So some participants are stating they might see students a little bit wired up, a lot of chatter, socializing.
Okay, so we're seeing that. I want to challenge your thinking to, and maybe kind of rephrase my question. What happened in the environment that got students to go where they needed to go at physical school?
We have a bell.
Bells, whistling, security. Okay, so we've got some environmental clues that are happening. You can look over at your peer and be like, oh, so-and-so is getting their book out. Oh, I should get my book out. There's a lot going on in our environment. Today, I want to challenge our thinking that the context of distance learning is so different. And we have layered on this extra executive function demand that I'll elaborate on this whole hour, that really we need to be mindful about augmenting and teaching. So here's what I mean. This is, I was telling Angela, my slides look so busy and this is not my typical, but I was, you know how you like chew on something in your brain for several weeks before you actually get to it, or at least I do. I was reading something about how Maslow's hierarchy, how it applies to distance learning, which is super interesting if you want to geek out. But then I thought, man, there's also like a similar hierarchy of skills that are required after about 4th grade, when we sort of release that responsibility and really kind of pass it on to kids. And so I developed this very recently. I would love your feedback too. If you have like, oh, I think context should be lower, or could you add this? I mean, it's definitely a work in progress, and I'll give you a link at the end to help provide feedback. Plus, I have a prize for you if you help out in that way. But I wanted to show this as an example for the contrast, because in physical school, there are so many social constructs and environmental clues that happen that support kids playing school that were just taken away in distance learning. So what I mean by a social construct is the kids will sort of shame you if you interrupt a teacher, especially if the class has a decent class culture. If you're constantly interrupting, you're going to get some social pressure to stop. The construct in our head is you just don't interrupt when a teacher's talking. Obviously, that does happen once in a while, but There are some social pressures that keep a lid on that for the most part. So that's the social construct part. We know what studenting looks like. We know that you enter the classroom and sit in the desk. We know that you get the materials you need. We know that you orient your body the right way. All of those things are socially programmed into our kids because we practice for years and years and years. We have changed so much of the construct, and we don't have the social piece to reinforce it. That went away. So that's a deficit that we're filling right now, or not filling, and then feeling the downside of not having that. We also, the physical components I was talking about are the bells, like we talked about in the warm-up, just thinking about that. I did not appreciate, I should say, the bell system and how it impacted my executive function, because your brain gives you like a decent amount of dopamine when you're under pressure to perform. So you get a good so that you can focus, so that you can utilize the strategies that you need to perform. Well, when you don't have necessarily as much of a demand of like a bell telling you where to go, or I have a lot more flexible of a schedule, I am struggling. I'm not boxing in by work like I used to, like, okay, it's second period, I have to do this, or this is my only prep, kind of squeezing things in where they fit and then where they don't fit and working later. It's a mess. And it's because some of the environmental clues have also been taken out for me. So in physical school, we have other prompts, as in like all the kids are turning in their work. Kids can look around and be like, oh shoot, I better do that. So there's some visual prompts. There's some peer-to-peer prompting that goes on. Even when we're able to walk the room and help, that's helping support so much of the executive functions that are needed at school. And we do naturally sort of remove the scaffolding as the students get older, and in high school we sort of step back and let the students take over. But when they're a lot younger, these are things that we're naturally supporting that I want us to understand aren't naturally being supported right now. The good news is I'll teach you how to support them. The bad news is some of the stuff that we've been struggling with our students is very much connected to this. While you take a look at this, I'm going to check the chat and just make sure there's anything. Do I need to know? Thank you for summarizing, by the way.
Yeah, so a few participants are kind of stating like that management, that organizational piece. So teachers, they're trying to provide. So the teachers are organizing. It's kind of like what we talked about, Sarah, one of our conversations about we're trying to organize and manage the piece to push it out to students. But I think what's happening is some teachers might not know some ways to do that effectively for their students. And so for the students, then it's difficult for them to be organized, for them to stay on top of assignments or activities. So it's that connection between the teacher organizational piece that would help in turn the student as well in the digital frame.
Absolutely. I agree with that entirely. And there's a couple of things that I think are like secondary, kind of behind the scenes thoughts. And that would be the system that I developed that makes sense in my teacher brain may not be the same for kids. So we really need to be mindful about exposing them to a variety of tools. The tools might not generalize. So if you teach a middle school English, then they might not use the same organization tips in math, even though to us it's like, well, duh, it's just another class. Sometimes it needs to be stated out. And then I forgot the third one, so I'll come back to it. But these are really intertwined, and I think what we need to, and what I hope you walk away from this with, is that you can retrain your brain to see with curiosity what's causing some of the struggles rather than being frustrated by the struggles. And that really, I mean, I'm done. That's all I want you to know. No, I'm just kidding. There's a whole bunch of hacks I want to share with you because I'm excited. But really, truly, that's what I'm trying to get us to do, is sort of switch into detective mode rather than irritated mode, which some days is easier than others. So here are, I bolded the ways that executive function demands have changed and multiplied in complexity and difficulty for our kids in distance learning. So if we look at the basics, most of the time, the kids who need help sort of go through this tiered system of help, not necessarily formal MTSS stuff, but just in thinking in terms of, if I see a lot of this, I'm going to reteach on the spot because I can see the kids don't get it. If I see a lot of squirreliness, that's an indication to me that I need to adjust my pace, give them a break, or kind of bump back the content and get them caught up. There's so much of in-person people reading supports for getting help that are just gone right now with distance learning, and that's really tricky. It takes a brave kid to admit in a chat or unmute that they don't get it. It's so much easier to just show up, get attendance, and then move on, even if you don't get it. There's not, I think we're still kind of working on making space for that vulnerability in most classes. And that just makes sense. I mean, I'm not asking questions in our staff meetings, but then I'll send a follow-up email. So kind of the same thing. Also context. We're asking kids to ignore all of the environmental cues that they have in their house, that home is their fun, chill space. And we're telling them, pretend you're working for 6 hours. That is crazy tough, especially for some of my kids. I have kids that access the live class from their backyards, or they sit in the car near a hotspot. I mean, these kids have hustle, but it also means that the context of school, in terms of reference posters on the wall, in terms of a lot of the things that subconsciously make us get into a focus mode, are just not there. And in fact, they're replaced by fun things like your little brother or your dog, or, you know, the TV is running in the background for a lot of kids. We have changed the basics of what supports kids focusing. We also, the context and process, I'm going to skip the routines for a bit because we're going to come back. The context and process has changed quite a bit. So the thing that I've found that I didn't anticipate for my kids was keeping track of when they asked for help. So knowing that they needed help, that's the first step. Asking for help in the right way and with enough specifics, because I'm seeing a lot of, I need help, and then an hour later I get to respond and I'm like, with what? The next day, with my math. Well, the next, an hour later, with what problem? And it's just this long, drawn out process, which there are so many opportunities in those voids between the responses for kids to just be like, meh, I'm done. And at school, our feedback loop is so much faster. I need help. Okay, come at lunch. I need help. All right, let me see your problem. What do you know? I mean, it's just, we've added this latency that kids have to keep track of, which honestly, I can't keep track of. Like, I need to follow up with kids on certain things, and I'm like, where's my list? What did I do with this? There's this demand for systems that was not there. And for some of our younger kids, or some of our kids with ADHD, or other disabilities that impact their executive function, man, this is an extra layer and a big opportunity for apathy to kind of wiggle in and say, no, it's not worth it anyway. So I'm going to teach you a couple strategies for dealing with the getting help. I see that the chat keeps distracting me because it keeps popping up.
I know.
Are there questions right now that I can help?
Well, there's a lot, like everybody's sharing, so that's why it's
Yay.
showing, which is really cool. So people are sharing just examples, or they're saying they agree with you. Scott had mentioned breakout rooms have been like a safe place for students to share or ask for help. Probably because I'm guessing the group is much smaller. And then just kind of like the detective idea, going back and trying to figure out, instead of like being immediately annoyed, take that mindful breath and think like, all right, how can we meet the needs of this student, or why is it a challenge, or what is happening? And then I had posted something that just kind of stated, even though it takes a lot of time to go over those routines and procedures and help at the beginning of the year, it will save you time later on by focusing on that now with
Oh,
the
it's such
students.
a pay it forward. So, so true.
But yeah, everybody's on board and they're just sharing out. They're sharing with each
Awesome.
other.
I appreciate it. And it's so fun. Like now my always learning brain is like, ooh, what ideas can I steal? But I'm supposed to be the idea genie right now, so I'm going to get back into my zone. All right. I've had a little bit of time with the screen up, so I imagine you've had some time to soak this in. Not fully, because it is so multi-layered. But what I wanted you to notice was all of the executive function pieces that we had set up in regular school are now doubled or tripled in complexity and difficulty for our kids, which does not make things impossible, but it definitely makes things a lot trickier. And these slides are available for reference later, so no need to memorize. That's sort of just a quick run through. Okay, those of you who have seen me present before know I like to push the envelope on naughty a little bit, because that's just kind of how I was raised, and also because the brain hangs on to things that are strange. So like people that do memory competitions, they'll try to make the strangest visual in their mind. Well, that's because new and novel gives you a boost of focus juice, usually just dopamine. Well, dopamine and its cocktail of friends. But the idea is this: don't should on your kids. So this is what I mean. When you hear yourself say, you're a ninth grader, you should be able to, or I sent you that link, you should have, or dude, we've had an English class at 9:15 every day for 3 weeks, you should remember by now. You're shoulding on your kids. And listen, you could do that all year for sure, but nothing will improve. You will feel worse. I almost said worser. You will feel worser, and nothing will get better. And then the kids won't have filled in those skill gaps. They'll just feel crappy about the subject. That's a lose. So what I'm suggesting instead is don't be shitty. We can augment with a whole bunch of skills. And Karen, maybe you can share your Wakelet link in the chat too, because Karen, oh my gosh, knocked it out of the park with her presentation this morning about tools, and that would really help with some of the augmentation. And then also we can teach, not just say, oh, you need an organization strategy, but instead, here's a menu of organization strategies and how we can use them. Okay, so the way I structured the presentation is I kind of took a chunk of one of the tiers of our executive function hierarchy, and we're going to talk about hacks to support those. Okay, so as you kind of look over the list, what I want you to realize is that kids aren't going to know how to recognize when they need help. A lot of the time we've trained them to just look a little bit uncomfortable and then we'll come and help them, or they'll miss some deadlines and we'll seek them out. Now that we're so overwhelmed and we have much more limited access to seeing their reactions, that pipeline of help has disintegrated. And we really need to stop and figure out how to empower them to ask for help. So ways that you might know that this isn't happening is kids start off engaged and then they disengage, or their projects aren't matching up with what you explained. They're doing only basics when before they used to go above and beyond. All of those things are indicative of they're having a hard time, or they have slingshot grades. So a couple of classes are great, a couple of classes are not. Those classes, they need to be self-advocating, and that would be when we pump them up. So a couple of should moments that I've had recently that I'm like, don't do that, would be when kids reach out for help and I'm like, dude, I've said this 36,000 times, you should know it by now. Like, that's when I go, okay, step away from the keyboard, you're going to take a minute and then come back and say, thank you so much for asking for help. Even if in your mind you're thinking, are you freaking kidding me? You should know this. Always praise them for asking for help, because we're behavior shaping. And the more we can get them into that pattern, hey, the less we're going to have to help in December when grades are due. Like Angela was saying, like, it's okay for them to not know. And given the stress, I'm going to show you at the end kind of what our brains are going through with the stress of a pandemic. It's a miracle that some of these kids are even showing up. Like, I have kids who are homeless, kids who are foster, kids who are raising their siblings while they're also doing online class. Like, it is incredibly inspiring and just jaw-dropping what our kids are putting aside and kind of just holding in their arms while they're attending school. They do not need my teacher attitude from my teacher perspective saying, bro, you should have paid attention. There is no should right now. We should be safe to breathe air outside, but we're not. That's reality, and we have to like function within that context. I also started adding my contact methods to every correspondence. So every email has my Google Voice, my email, my hours, all of that. I don't shame them if they text me on Google Voice during the weekend. Sometimes I respond. Sometimes I say, hey, I got to wait till Monday, and that's fine. You can have your own personal boundaries. But what I would say, just when they advocate for help, is to honor it and celebrate it to the point where you feel like you're being cheesy, because that's probably the level they need. The home versus, yeah, go ahead.
Really quick. So as we're talking about self-advocacy, one of the participants asked about like late work, because it can become an overload for the teacher, right? Like going back and checking that late work. So how, like, do you suggest a cutoff time? How do you manage, or what is a suggestion for managing that? And we understand, like you were saying, like every student's situation is different, but for management, in a management way, like what would be a good way to do that or encourage, that self-advocacy of late work being turned in?
That's a great idea. So we're going to get into some strategies for managing workload, which I think will help address that a bit. With late work, I have kind of been a sucker, and honestly, I'm developing better strategies because I'm taking the empathy road rather than the sustainable road for me. So there's still some meat in the middleness that I need to take on. So I'm not going to own that I like have this down, but I do encourage the kids to let me know when they've turned something in, so it's not just like in the Google Classroom void, because I'm not good at checking about that. And then the second strategy that my co-teacher and I are using is we schedule an asynchronous day once a month where we park the kids on some video that we've made and they do an activity, and then we just jam through catching up on late work. So we've sort of filled a scheduled buffer. We've built a scheduled buffer for ourselves, knowing that we've put ourselves in that situation, opening the gate for late work. And so that kind of meets in the middle in terms of being kid friendly, but then also being us friendly, because this week grades were due and I worked till 6, 9, and 8 p.m. 3 days in a row, and was like, okay, Sarah, you are a dum-dum. You need a better system. So I guess I shoulded on myself. I should have had a better system. I just didn't expect my little hustlers to turn in as much as they did. So, so the home and school context is a little bit about perspective and a little bit about parent empowerment, because we can't go to their houses and fix up everything. And so I would challenge you to empower your parents and include them. So give them strategies and try to take out as much judgment as you can. I know some parents are just like the kids and they're not reaching out for help because they're afraid of getting well, you should know, or why don't you just sort of reaction. So as much as you can, just blanketly share, hey, I learned this strategy. Here's something you can do at home. And I have a whole podcast, and it's like the text is on the blog too if you're more of a reader than a listener. So I'll give you all that info because I had a couple of ideas of really inexpensive ways to facilitate changing the home's situation into feeling like school so that our brains react with that like focus space. Because I also recognize that the gaps between people with better socioeconomic abilities and then people with better executive function are just getting so much bigger because of this. And so my hope is that any strategy I provide is cheap or free. Like you can use like a towel or a tablecloth to change the context of the space you're working in. So when the tablecloth or towel is on, that's where food goes, that's where we eat, this is family time. When it goes away, maybe you bring your, you know, like converted soup can with your pencils in it to the table, and that's a visual cue to your brain. The tablecloth is gone, I've changed my context, now I'm focused. So just an example. And then if your district gives you permission to allow the kids to not have mics and cameras on at certain points, I would definitely encourage trusting that kids are showing up right now and not needing that 100% accountability all the time. Because yes, it matters that they're being responsible, but like we saw on the pyramid, there's so much else going on that needs to be addressed before we really toe the line on that with them. We're good, yeah? Okay. I was reading your face. See, I'm using being able to see you right now, but I can't see everybody. So Angela's just gonna tell me. Okay.
No, they said, the ladies have said, just ignore the chat, keep going, because they're all listening to you and they appreciate everything you're sharing right now.
Awesome. Ladies, Scott, you are a lovely lady.
Well, no.
I'm just kidding. He's my friend. I can be mean to him, right? He just has one single tear anyway, so we're okay. All right.
I couldn't unmute. I was going to say I haven't had a haircut since February 20th, so I could be one of the ladies at this point.
I like it. I know. Angela and I both did home haircuts and then sent each other pictures. Yeah, see, we're all getting creative. I'm strategizing the struggle. Okay. We're missing the bells. I really, really miss the bells to keep me on track, let alone our kids. So we can actually teach our kids to use bell replacement strategies. So if you're noticing that a kid is consistently showing up late, this is the point where you could go on the should road and be like, dude, you should show up. Or, hey, what do you think we can set up that would help you get to class on time? And if the kid generates the ideas through like you're facilitating through questioning, oh my gosh, they're going to be strategies that they can use now, but then also maybe to make it to work on time in the future, or to not be late to their own wedding, you know, just the basics. So when you do a bell replacement system, or you talk to a parent about setting that up, let's say you have a kid in class that's late and the parent reaches out for help, I would challenge you to think about how many bells you have at school, because it's never just one. So they can't have a reminder at 9:15 that basically is telling them you're already late. That's going to be extra frustrating. So instead, maybe one at 9:09, you got 6 minutes to get ready. And then at 9:14, get your butt in the chair and sign in. And then at 9:15 to like double check that they're there. So if you do go the bell replacement strategy, just make sure that you don't take for granted how many there are needed. But then that also could be a way for you to help encourage kids to move and stuff, because maybe they all have a bell that goes off at 10:20 that they need to get up and move. So there's a couple of ways to use that. I'm not going to read everything to you, but I do want to admit something that I screwed up. So I co-teach, and then I also have a special ed only English class, which ethically I don't even know that I'm with it, but that's what I'm assigned, just because I don't think my kids should be isolated, you know. And so one day I have 15 kids enrolled in my special ed English class, and I had one show up. And I took that so deeply personally. Not that they didn't like me, but that I messed up big time, because it was like the second or third week of school. More of them had showed up before, and now all of a sudden they weren't there. What the heck? And so instead of saying should and being like, guys, you should have come to class, what is wrong with you? I instead thought back to like, where did I fall off? What happened? Well, it turned out, even though the whole school agreed to do Google Classroom as our platform, not every teacher was posting links, because the teachers were shoulding and saying, oh, you should just use the link that's on Google Classroom and show up. So some of the kids were consistently missing classes that were in that boat. I did post the link on Google Classroom, but what I took for granted was that other teachers were actually doubling up their communication. They were emailing kids when it was time to show up. They were sending the actual link. They were texting kids when they needed to show up. They had like all these branches of the come to class tree going on, and kids got used to that. And when I would only post it on Google Classroom, we were missing out. And so I did not want to. It was irritating to even have to, but I changed my practice. And now every time I log into Google Meet, I send the kids a link directly to them. I post it on Google Classroom. Is it annoying? Totally. Is it redundant? Yeah. But my classes have 90% or better attendance, which again is a freaking miracle, because our kids have COVID. Our kids have lost parents. Our kids, like, they are in the highest impacted zip code of the whole county in San Diego. And yet here they are, which just sometimes makes me cry, especially when I praise them. And then I'm like, there's no crying in distance learning. Totally is. Every day, right, Angela? But that's us. Okay. So again, I know it's annoying to handhold, but right now, if that's what they need and that's what's going to kind of put down the bridge for them to come over to learning, let's do it. And maybe you can think of some hacks and some systems for yourself, or if you have a classroom aide, maybe that's their job. Whatever you can do to make that part of your routine would be super helpful for kids. Okay. When we are at school, there are a whole bunch of attention management strategies that I want you to think of so that you understand how much we've been taking them for granted. So if you have a kid that's screwing around, you might like wiggling around, you might be like, hey buddy, do you want to run an errand for me? Like, get that energy out. You might go stand by them. You might allow them to stand up. If you have a kid that's like sneaking their phone, you take the phone. Right now, we can't do that. And so, and again, with that context of home now being school too, there are so many amazing distractions available. Like, I can hear my husband cooking something and my brain is like, what's that? Or my cat will come in and go potty every day, at least during one class, in her box. So it's still appropriate, but it's very distracting to pretend like I can't smell turds at the time. And there's a lot that I have to use to manage my own attention too. So, and I'm sorry if I'm offending people by saying turds. It's Saturday. I'm allowed to say that. But the point is, we have to mindfully put in some systems for our kids and just invite them to try them, and then praise the heck out of them when they try them. So one thing would be, as part of your opening routine, everybody take your tiny computer, put it upside down far, far away, or, you know, just prompting for reminders of that can really, really be helpful. Okay, but I need to turn my tiny computer over so I don't go over time. I recently got the chance to teach a parent group in Memphis, which was so super cool. And we talked about Goldilocksing help. And together we came up with a whole bunch of strategies, and I took the best of those to put in here. Because like I said before, we're really good people readers as teachers. And so we're getting the feedback when kids need help and providing it automatically. And now we've put that emphasis on them. So we're like, hey, you need to know when you need help, and you need to know what help you need. That is such a heady process that honestly, those neural pathways aren't solid until you're about 22. So back that up to like 3rd grade, like Angela teaches, and oh man, that's really tricky. And I think what we see on our teacher end with distance learning is incomplete work or no work at all. What we don't see is that breakdown of skills. So again, this is where you're like detective, this is my magnifying glass. That's where your detective work comes in to think like, could it be that this kid doesn't know what they don't know, or doesn't know how to ask help, for help? So a couple of things to do is just have the kids develop a help list. So that's their method of keeping track of what they've asked for. Also train them to be very specific in their answers. So we actually had an assignment be to create 2 practice emails to teachers. And actually, I'll put a link to it in this when we're all done, and that way in the Google Slides you can have access to it. But it was basically just learn, I mean, it did have some formality and tone and register of voice because duh, we're teaching English. But the idea was, let's practice specifically asking for help so that you don't do this weird volley with that long latency of time waiting for help. Instead, you're very specific. I've had kids make videos, like take their phone and like screenshot and tell me exactly what they need. I praise those and I use those as opening examples. So we do like a strategy celebration to open class. That could be a great way for you to fold in executive function. And just having kids keep track of where they are. They can also keep track of what they need help with like a help needed space. And that way it becomes a physical prompt. So a physical prompt is just something visual that you put in your own way so that you have to interact with it so you don't forget it. So an example of that would be like put your soccer cleats right in front of the front door so that when you leave in the morning, you have to trip on them and then you're like, oh yeah, my soccer cleats, and you pick them up. So, and I picked this up, which is funny because this is my cat's vet bill, which I need to submit to insurance, which is my visual prompt sitting right here in front of me. So not gonna lie, I drink my own Kool-Aid. So just having kids have a physical space, they could even like just use painter's tape and tape it out as an example. And that way they don't need to interrupt their parents. If their parents are working from home, they can just put it in the space and it's sort of like a parking lot. Or when they come to your office hours, they've got all of those help needed references readily available so they're not wasting time finding it. Another thing so super interesting, I'm coaching a junior in high school and he refuses to do anything out of order. And this was something that like we all just kind of took for granted, like duh, you skip the one you need help on and then you move on. No, I guess he hadn't unlocked permission in his own like construct of school and he was stuck. So if he got stuck on number 3, number 4 didn't happen until several days later when the assignment was already late and he finally was able to facilitate his own help. So food for thought to just mention it to kids. You'll be kind of amazed at how many assume that you can't. You absolutely can. You could do the thing backwards. And actually, sometimes switching up how you approach a worksheet or something is a great strategy for giving your brain a little bit of focus juice and making something more fun. Even if you don't want to do it, sometimes that's just enough to give you the juices that we're missing. Okay. I hate super fast like this. I apologize, guys. This is not best practice, but an hour is a very tiny time. With the tech platforms, again, I would say this is really just a reminder to hear how many times you say should in your head, and then stop. When you hear yourself say should, or, you know, you should just Google it, or you should already know how to do it. Like, no, they don't. So quit shaming and start teaching, which means you can make a help video. You can park some help videos that other people have made that you like, that kids can access. Send them out again and again and again and again and again, like 10 to 20 times more than you think you have to. That's how many times you're going to have to send it out. So if it's how to turn in a Google Doc, I can't tell you, like, I probably increased the turn-in rate by about 300% within a week by sending out the couple of help videos and then actually demonstrating in class a few times. It took learning time and that sucked, but a 300-400% increase, I'm going to take it. That's way better than, again, me sitting in my house in December catching up on late work because kids didn't know how to turn it in. So food for thought. And then also, as students are coming in, consider having an onboarding system, just like a Google Drive folder of all those help videos of how to set up their iPad, or, you know, anything you can think of that's sort of the that forms that base of our executive function triangle. Digitizing that, just having a video available would be incredibly important. How are we doing on chat, my love?
We are doing great. Karen had even mentioned how you mentioned the videos, tutorials, having student-made videos as well. Because, you know, students, just like teachers, we learn great from our peers. Students will learn from their own peers. And then just a little bit of talk about like the, you know, our students with ADD, ADHD. I've got a lot of students who are unidentified, right? So it's like being that detective and using those clues to help you try to figure out like why that might be happening. So I know how you mentioned like that go in order. I noticed in third grade especially, it was mostly students who had ADD, ADHD who would just fixate on going in a sequencing order. And it's trying to, you know, kind of break that habit. So redirect them. So it's, you're definitely hitting what a lot of people are seeing and experiencing.
It's, yeah, well, because I am too. And, you know, like I have to embrace my hypocrisy because I have that voice that still says should, even though it's like a super naughty word in my mind. It still happens from time to time, especially when you're tired. And in a few slides in the future, we're going to show kind of how stress, and especially in this context, is really impacting our brains, which makes sense why we're more tempted to should on kids in life right now. Okay, I do want to first acknowledge that I screwed up and I put tech platforms on twice. And then I want to go back and talk about managing work, okay? So this is probably the teacher and parents' first concern. I would argue that this is a manifestation of a lot of the lower levels having some holes in them. But if you wanted some quick and dirty, let's make sure that you don't drown in the wave of distance learning assignments. Here they are. So park your class's to-do list in somewhere consistent. And then again, if you have an opening routine that includes some of the management components, like celebrating a strategy or checking in with what's due that week or last week or coming up, it's a great way to also facilitate, just add in your to-do list for your class somewhere separate from their grades. So their grades usually focus as a should have been, or they serve as like a should have been done list. So, and I'm guilty of this too. When I assign something, the only time it goes in the grade book is when I'm grading it because I've collected it. So if kids are using that as their to-do list, the only time they get the information is when it's already late. And that is a crappy feeling. So either enter the assignments when you assign them so that there's like a visual as your to-do list, or have a separate to-do list, separate from grades, separate from points, just sort of a checklist like we all use in real life. And that's really a great way to facilitate some adulting behaviors anyway. You could even add in like backwards planning where you know you have a to-do list. Scott, this one's for you. You know you have something coming up. So how can you make mini deadlines up the calendar before it's due so that you don't miss your deadline? You could even teach them to give themselves a false deadline where if it's a Friday due date, their personal due date is Thursday, and that kind of provides a buffer. So there's lots of ways to use the to-do list, and I know I'm going crazy fast. The good thing is a lot of this is on the podcast, or I am so happy to geek out about it. That's how Angela and Scott and I bonded. So just reach out. I'll give you my contact info at the end. And Karen, it's all my friends here. We've even used a Google form as a to-do list. It also helps like with instant attendance because then I can just take the Google form and translate it to my attendance. But we've done that to kind of get a feel for which assignments kids are missing, which ones they're struggling with. You can use that as a quick way to get feedback on, do you understand directions? You can also build in, so if your period is like an hour, you can build in maybe 5-10 minutes of asynchronous time before they log in, and then have a couple of self-management techniques built in, like check that you have this, did you hit submit? Which again, that's one of those should moments like, holy crap, you didn't hit submit again, are you kidding me? But yeah, we have kids that consistently don't, so let's not should, let's just say like you got to hit submit maybe 2 times. And then I would encourage you to showcase strategies. We talked about that a little bit. And then your closing routine, give them time to write down their assignments, give them time to organize their things, give them time to like, all right, let's move this into your Google folder that's red, that's color coded for English. Sorry. All right, I'm going to skip the social learning, not that it doesn't matter, but because I wanted to show you the brain stuff and I need to be mindful of your time. Although, I do want to tell you this cool thing. I mentioned it earlier in a slide and then forgot to verbally mention it, but this will be like way back to your credential moments. Do you remember intermittent reinforcement? It's like kettle corn or slot machines. Basically like where it's inconsistent, you get your reward some of the time and some of the time you don't. Well, our dang brains will work way harder for something that is intermittently reinforced than something that is consistently reinforced. So like when guys learn to flirt, you know, they're like, okay, we'll ignore the girl a little bit, but then give her some attention and then don't. It's the same concept. Like you get that perfect bite of kettle corn and then a couple of them are like, not what you want, and then you're like, oh, I can get that perfect bite again, and then the whole bag's gone. That's intermittent reinforcement. So to use that for kids is super powerful right now because you can give them a boost of dopamine, which is associated with memory, attention, and initiation. Hello. And it's really easy to do. So just every once in a while say, hey, respond to this email for 3 extra credit points. It's free for you. And then it helps train them to respond to emails, and you're hitting them with dopamine. It is a win, win, win. Okay, so our switch today is instead of why don't kids just, why don't they should, it's how can I help kids too. And I skipped my brain one. All right, this is my favorite slide. And of course, Sarah Jane Kesty, you saved it to the last 5 minutes. I apologize. All right, here's the deal. You know that stressed brains have increased adrenaline and cortisol. Well, the thing is, all of the executive functions are associated with this prefrontal cortex, this front part of your brain. When you are stressed, a lot of the activity is shown to move into like lizard brain space, flight, fright, or freeze. And that stinks because right now, between like adolescence, so I'd say like 6th grade and age 22, our brains are under heavy duty construction. And every time we sort of travel one of the neural pathway roads in our brains, it strengthens. We have to. We are like brain surgeons by proxy. We have to consider that when we're doing this work. So when you hear yourself should, you're not only making yourself feel bad, but you're also missing out on an opportunity to improve their brains. So make sure, like this is my soapbox for why executive function matters so much. Make sure that you are mindfully teaching it, augmenting it, and then explaining the augmentation and making sure that you're reminding kids how to use it outside of your class. I also just want to recognize the social isolation is felt in the same, not in the same way as physical pain, but it registers as the same sensation in our brains. So if you think about that for a sec, like we all are feeling bad and it's very, very real. So I have my best practices right here. I would say sometimes as our closing activity after the kids have written down what they need to do, we let them have a couple minutes of like very off-topic chat where they can share like, I'll be on Minecraft, join me there or whatever, like whatever. I'm dorky, I don't know, but like the social stuff that they do online, they can share their Snapchat or their other social media things to be able to connect at least virtually outside of school. Yeah, and then Angela was an amazing example of what my partner teacher and I do and what my aide does for me, and that's just summarize main points while you're teaching so that they're reinforced, especially for, 70% of kids with learning disabilities, their processing disorder is auditory processing disorder. And how do we present our information? Auditorily. So more food for thought. And here is how to reach me if you wanted to geek out with me more. I love it. It's my thing. And I'm going to put in the chat. So I consider myself a work in progress. And I would love any feedback you have about what I taught you guys, or other ideas you have to make this even more powerful, and strategies that you've used that kind of fit in with the pyramid, all that stuff. And not intermittent reinforcement. I actually promised this one it will be 100%, but if you do the feedback form, then there's a spot for you to put in an address, and I'll send you some podcast stickers as a thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, so much. This was so great. Participants felt validated in a lot that you were sharing, I think, which is huge. Me and you, we both get really emotional over this because we're so passionate about what we do. But sometimes we just need reminders. We need to hear it. So thank you so much. Oh, it says they need permission for the form.
I was just looking at that, so I'm working on that right now. Duh. Yeah, because I don't have G Suite in my personal stuff, so I use work. Okay, let me fix that right quick.
Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but we won't go anywhere.
Sure, that's a great idea. All right, so I need to